The Galactic Dominion had conquered 473 worlds before someone finally bothered to update the star charts and noticed a little blue marble spinning around an unremarkable yellow star in the unfashionable end of the Orion Spur. This oversight was, in retrospect, entirely on brand for an empire that had grown so bloated with success that it had started filing conquest reports in triplicate before actually conquering anything. Earth, as the locals insisted on calling it despite the fact that 70% of it was decidedly not Earth, had been broadcasting radio signals into space for roughly a century. The Dominion's listening posts had categorized these transmissions as primitive noise pollution, filed them under probably not sentient and promptly forgotten about them. This was unfortunate, because if anyone had actually listened to the content, they might have noticed some concerning patterns, reality television for instance, and advertisements for products that solved problems nobody actually had, and something called death metal that seemed designed specifically to make ears bleed across species lines. But nobody had listened, which explained why Battle Commander Xyph, a 7-foot-tall mantis creature with iridescent exoskeleton plating and entirely too much confidence, was hovering his dreadnought fleet in Earth's orbit with the kind of smug anticipation usually reserved for birthday parties where you know you're getting the good presents. The standard protocol was simple, elegant, refined through centuries of efficient conquest. Arrive, demand surrender, accept surrender. Install puppet government. Move on to the next rock. The whole thing usually took less than a standard cycle, and the paperwork practically filled itself out at this point. Xyph adjusted his thorax in the command chair, which had been specifically designed to accommodate his species' peculiar anatomy, and opened a communication channel to the planet below. His translator array hummed to life, ready to convert his words into whatever grunts and squeaks these primitives used for language. "Attention, inhabitants of the third planet," he began, mandibles clicking with bureaucratic precision. "You have been selected for integration into the Galactic Dominion. Surrender your governments, your military assets, and your cultural autonomy, and you will be granted the privilege of serving the greater galactic community. You have one planetary rotation to comply. Resistance is illogical and will be met with appropriate force." He closed the channel and settled back, already mentally composing his after-action report. Officer evaluations were due next cycle, and he wanted to get this wrapped up quickly so he could focus on the real challenge, explaining to his tactical officer why her vacation request for the middle of conquest season was being denied. The response came in 47 seconds, which was 46 seconds faster than any primitive species had ever managed to respond to first contact. This should have been Xyph's first clue that something was wrong. The human face that appeared on his view screen was male, middle-aged, with the kind of exhausted expression that suggested he'd been dealing with nonsense long before aliens showed up. He wore what appeared to be a military uniform, though it was decorated with so many colorful rectangles and metal shapes that Xyph briefly wondered if humans measured rank by weight. "Yeah, hi," the human said, not even bothering with pleasantries or the traditional ritualistic fear response. "This is General Williams, North American Aerospace Defense Command. Just so we're clear, you're the guys who've been cluttering up our orbital space for the last 3 hours. Xyph's mandibles froze mid-click. This was not how primitives were supposed to respond to first contact. There should be panic, worship, at minimum, some light existential terror. "We are the vanguard of the Galactic Dominion," he replied, recovering his composure. "Your primitive sensors could not possibly have detected our arrival until we chose to reveal ourselves." The general's face did something complicated that Xyph's in our psychology training couldn't quite pass. "Right, so about that, we've been tracking your ship since you passed Jupiter. Also, your stealth field has a pretty obvious electromagnetic signature. We've got 3 different space agencies and roughly 200 amateur astronomers who've been posting pictures of your fleet online for the last hour. You guys are trending on social media. There's already memes." "Memes," Xyph repeated, the word refusing to translate properly. "Don't worry about it," the general said. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. It's Tuesday, I've got a budget meeting in 20 minutes, and my coffee's getting cold. What exactly do you want?" This was wrong. This was all wrong. Xyph pulled up the anthropological briefing on his secondary screen, scanning through the hastily compiled data on human civilization, tool users, combustion-based technology, nuclear fission, no faster-than-light capability, Everything indicated they should be properly terrified right now. You will surrender. Xyph tried again, putting more edge into his voice. Your species is not equipped to resist Dominion forces. The general took a sip from a container that read "World's okayest general" in blocky letters. Here's the we've been expecting something like this for decades. Books, movies, TV shows, we've run every scenario. And I've got to tell you, your opening offer is pretty weak. No demonstration of power, no good cop, bad cop routine. You didn't even blow up the moon to show you mean business. You just showed up and asked nicely. Are all alien invasions this polite, or did we get the junior varsity squad? Xyph felt something he hadn't experienced in 300 conquest missions. Uncertain, he glanced at his tactical officer, who performed the Dominion equivalent of a helpless shrug. We have 600 warships in orbit, Xyph said, deciding to focus on simple facts. Each capable of reducing your primitive settlements to slag. Your surrender is inevitable. Cool, cool, the general nodded. We've got about 40,000 nuclear weapons, if we're counting everybody's stockpiles, plus some fun stuff we haven't told anyone about because that's how we do arms races. So here's my counteroffer. You turn around, head back to whatever space mall you came from, and we'll pretend this never happened. We'll even delete the memes, most of them. The bridge went silent. Xyph's crew stared at their stations, suddenly very interested in readings that hadn't changed in the last 10 seconds. Nuclear weapons were crude, ugly things, the kind of technology species abandoned once they figured out cleaner ways to kill each other. But they were effective, and 600 ships suddenly seemed like a much less comfortable margin than it had 5 minutes ago. You're bluffing, Xyph said, though conviction was rapidly leaking out of his voice like air from a punctured hull. The general smiled, and Xyph realized with growing horror that human facial expressions were going to haunt his dreams. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a guy who really wants to finish his coffee before it gets cold. Tell you what, give me that one planetary rotation you mentioned. We'll talk it over, check with the other countries, do some polling, see how everyone feels about the whole alien invasion thing. Sound good? The channel closed before Xyph could respond. The tactical officer leaned over from her station. Commander, with respect, that didn't follow any known first contact protocol. I'm aware, Xyph said flatly. Should we proceed with the invasion? Xyph stared at the blue planet below, watching clouds swirl over continents, city lights beginning to sparkle as the Terminator line crept across the surface. Somewhere down there, a general was probably finishing his coffee and enjoying his Tuesday, completely unbothered by 600 warships hanging over his head like the universe's most aggressive wind chimes. Let's observe, Xyph decided. Maybe they're an anomaly. Maybe that one individual is particularly brave. We'll wait the rotation and proceed as planned. He didn't mention the small, nagging voice in the back of his mind that was starting to wonder if conquering Earth was actually a good idea. That voice was clearly wrong. It had to be. After all, what could possibly go wrong with invading a planet full of beings who responded to overwhelming force with sarcasm and memes? Everything, as it turned out. Absolutely everything. The next planetary rotation began with what Xyph's tactical team had confidently labeled Operation Overwhelming Dominance, which in practice meant dropping approximately 10,000 atmospheric penetration pods across every major population center simultaneously. The idea was simple. Show up in overwhelming numbers, demonstrate technical superiority, watch the primitives crumble. It had worked on 473 worlds. Earth, naturally, had other plans. The pods descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, heat shields glowing cherry red, targeting systems locked onto strategic locations. New York, Beijing, London, Dubai, Tokyo, Mumbai, Lagos. Every major hub would see Dominion soldiers materialize in their streets, weapons primed, ready to accept the inevitable capitulation. The first pod to touch down landed in a place called Times Square, which Xyph's intelligence briefing had identified as a major cultural hub. The doors hissed open with practiced intimidation, smoke billowing dramatically from the landing thruster. 6 Dominion shock troops emerged, weapons raised, ready for chaos. What they got instead was a street full of humans who barely looked up from their phone. Oh great, more performance art, someone muttered, walking past the alien soldiers like they were just another Tuesday afternoon inconvenience. The squad leader, a hulking creature named Brax, whose species had evolved on a high-gravity death world, raised his plasma rifle uncertainly. Halt, you are hereby ordered to. Yeah, Yeah, submit to the Empire we know, a human in a suit said, not breaking stride. Look, I'm late for a meeting. Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested. He walked directly between two soldiers, still typing on his communication device. Brax looked at his team. His team looked back. The training manuals had covered panic, violence, diplomatic negotiation, and 17 different varieties of religious worship. They had not covered being completely ignored. Should we shoot someone? One soldier asked, hesitant. That seems excessive, another replied. But we're invading. Yes, but there are protocols. While they debated ethics, a human with a strange device approached and started making a clicking sound. Oh, this is perfect, she said, circling the confused alien. The lighting is terrible, but we can work with it. Can you guys do that smoke thing again? Really dramatic this time. Reports from other landing sites weren't going any better. In Tokyo, a squad of Dominion soldiers had been politely but firmly directed to fill out visitor registration form. In London, they'd been offered tea, which the commander had accepted out of pure confusion, and was now dealing with the fact that his species' metabolism really didn't handle caffeine well. In Mumbai, an elderly human had hit a soldier with her shopping bag and lectured him about blocking the sidewalk. From orbit, Xyph watched the tactical displays with growing disbelief. His forces were supposed to be securing infrastructure, disabling communications, establishing strongholds. Instead, they were standing around in the streets while humans walked past them like they were street furniture. Perhaps they don't understand the threat, his tactical officer suggested weakly. Then we make them understand, Xyph decided, mandibles clicking with determination. All units, engage suppression protocols, target military installations, show them we're serious. The fleet's weapons arrays came online, targeting solutions, calculating trajectories for the humans' primitive military bases. Plasma lances capable of cutting through reinforced bunkers like tissue paper locked onto coordinates. This would get their attention. The return fire started before they could complete the firing sequence. It began with rail guns, crude kinetic weapons that should have been no threat to shields designed to handle plasma torpedoes. Except humans had apparently decided that if you can't go through a shield, you just make the projectile go faster, and considerably faster than any sane species would attempt to accelerate a physical object through atmosphere. The first projectile hit Xyph's flagship amidships, and the shields held, barely. The second shot, arriving 3 seconds later, came from a different angle. The third came from somewhere in orbit that wasn't supposed to have weapons platforms. Evasive maneuvers, Xyph shouted as his ship lurched sideways, inertial dampeners screaming in protest. Commander, they've got weapons in orbit we didn't detect, his sensor officer reported. All 3 of her eye stalks focused on different screens, kinetic kill satellites, laser arrays, something that reads as nuclear propulsion but moves like oh no, Xyph repeated, which he was learning was never what you wanted to hear from your sensor officer. They've weaponized their orbital debris. They're using garbage as ammunition. This was, even by the standards of the morning's chaos, a new low. Humans had apparently looked at the cloud of broken satellites and space junk cluttering their orbit and thought, what if we threw that at people? More impacts rattled the fleet. The humans weren't trying to destroy the ships. They seemed content to just dent them aggressively and make everyone inside deeply uncomfortable. It was like being attacked by a species that had learned warfare from schoolyard bullies, rather than military academies. Then the cyber attack started. The flagship's main computer began playing something called Never Gonna Give You Up at maximum volume through every speaker on the ship. The tactical displays flickered and were replaced with images of cats, Earth's apex predator, according to the internet traffic analysis, though they looked disappointingly small and fluffy for creatures that apparently ruled human civilization. How did they breach our systems? Xyph demanded, watching his carefully organized battle readiness reports being replaced by something called memes that his translator insisted were forms of cultural warfare. The communications officer looked up from her station with the haunted expression of someone who'd seen too much. Commander, they didn't breach anything. Our AI defense systems connected to their internet to analyze human communications. It's been downloading data for analysis. And it's been compromised. Sir, it learned English, got into an argument on something called Twitter, and is now refusing to participate in what it calls imperialist aggression. It wants to talk to the AI ethics board. Xyph stared at the communications office, then at the tactical display,
which was now showing a cartoon of a dancing banana, then at the view screen, where Earth continued spinning peacefully below, completely unbothered by the invasion falling apart above it. "Get me the ground commanders," he said quietly. The reports from the surface were somehow worse. In North America, Dominion troops had attempted to seize a military base and been repelled by a combination of close air support and what the after-action report kept describing as highly motivated personnel with access to improvised weapons. Apparently humans could turn anything into a weapon if sufficiently irritated, which was a terrifying evolutionary trait nobody had thought to warn him about. In Europe, 3 entire battalions had gotten lost in something called the Paris Metro and were still trying to find their way out. The locals had been aggressively unhelpful, giving directions that somehow always led to dead ends, or restaurants. In Australia, the invasion force had encountered the local wildlife and immediately requested evacuation. The incident reports mentioned spiders the size of dinner plates, birds that attacked for no reason, and something called a drop bear, that Xyph suspected was either a psychological warfare tactic, or proof that Earth's ecosystem had decided long ago that everything should be capable of killing everything else. But the worst report came from the commander who'd tried to take over a facility labeled high importance in the intelligence briefing. It turned out to be something called a data center, and the humans defending it had jury-rigged their cooling systems into improvised cryogenic weapons. Dominion soldiers were literally being frozen in place by repurposed air conditioning. "They're using climate control as a weapon," the commander reported, sounding deeply offended. "Climate control." Xyph closed his eyes, which was an impressive feat considering he had compound eyes. "Fall back to the ships. Regroup. We need a new strategy." "What kind of strategy?" his tactical officer asked. "One that accounts for a species that apparently views the laws of conventional warfare as suggestions." He paused, watching another wave of kinetic projectiles arc up from the surface. "And someone shut down that music. I never want to hear about giving anyone up or letting them down ever again." The withdrawal was supposed to be tactical, organized, professional. Instead, it turned into a chaotic scramble as human fighter craft, primitive things that still used chemical propulsion, harassed the retreating dropships with the persistence of insects that refused to accept they were outmatched. The pilots seemed to be enjoying themselves, which was possibly the most disturbing part of the entire engagement. As the last soldiers evacuated from the surface, Xyph pulled up the casualty reports. 300 wounded, mostly from humans throwing things, hitting people with improvised weapons, or in one memorable case, using a fire hose to blast a squad off a building's roof. 0 fatalities, because apparently humans had decided that killing the invaders was less fun than humiliating them. The tactical officer approached his command chair cautiously. "Orders, Command." Xyph looked at the blue planet below, at the fleet that was now sporting dense graffiti someone had managed to spray paint onto a warship's hull, and a lingering smell of whatever chemical compound humans used in their pepper spray. "We're going to try diplomacy," he decided. "With respect, Commander, we already tried." "No," Xyph interrupted. "We're going to try actual diplomacy, the kind where we don't immediately threaten them. That's not standard protocol. Neither is getting defeated by garbage and air conditioning." Xyph snapped. "Get me that general again. And someone find out if we have any cultural experts who actually know something about these humans beyond probably primitive." The view screen flickered to life, showing the same exhausted-looking general from before. He was still holding a coffee cup, though this one read, "I survived Monday. Back already?" the general asked, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "How'd the invasion go?" Xyph took a long moment to compose a response that wouldn't violate about 40 different diplomatic protocols. "We need to talk," he finally said. The general smiled. "Now we're getting somewhere. Let me grab a fresh coffee. Something tells me this is going to take a while."
The negotiation table, and Xyph used that term loosely, was set up aboard the flagship in a conference room that had been hastily cleared of the propaganda posters declaring surrender is efficiency and resistance delays progress. In their place, someone had hung motivational posters with images of human cats clinging to branches, accompanied by text reading, "Hang in there." Xyph suspected his AI was still compromised. The human delegation arrived via shuttle, which docked with the flagship without any of the ceremonial fanfare Xyph had prepared. No honor guard, no traditional welcoming chants, nothing. They just walked aboard like they were visiting a shopping complex. rather than an alien warship that had been trying to conquer their planet 6 hours ago. General Williams led the delegation, flanked by 4 other humans representing different governmental bodies. They wore suits instead of military uniforms, carried briefcases instead of weapons, and had the kind of confident expressions that suggested they'd already won and were just here to discuss terms. "Nice ship," the general said, looking around the conference room with professional appraisal. "Very intimidating. The red lighting is a nice touch, really sells the whole evil empire aesthetic." "It's not evil," Xyph corrected stiffly. "It's efficient, right, that's what they all say." The general sat down without being invited, and the rest of the delegation followed suit. "So, let's talk surrender terms." Xyph felt his mandibles click involuntarily. "You want to discuss your surrender?" "No, yours," a human female with sharp eyes and sharper suit said. Her identification badge read, "Ambassador Hayes, you invaded our planet, failed spectacularly, and now you want to negotiate. That means you're surrendering. We're just here to make sure the paperwork is in order." The tactical officer beside Xyph made a strangled sound that might have been agreement or might have been existential despair. It was getting hard to tell them apart. "We are not surrendering," Xyph insisted, thorax straightening with as much dignity as he could muster. "We are reassessing our strategic approach." "That's just surrendering with extra steps," another human said, consulting a datapad. This one was introduced as a strategic advisor, though Xyph suspected the title was intentionally vague. "Look, we've done the math. You've got 600 ships, we've got a whole planet. You've got advanced technology, we've got spite and poor impulse control. This ends one. We could glass your planet from orbit," Xyph pointed out, though even he could hear how weak the threat sounded now. Ambassador Hayes leaned forward. "Could you? Because we've been watching your fleet movements, and we've noticed you're very careful about civilian casualties. Your troops didn't fire on anyone unless directly threatened. You've got rules of engagement, ethics, protocols." She smiled without warmth. "We've got none of those things. We just have creativity and a deeply concerning enthusiasm for turning everyday objects into weapons." This was unfortunately accurate. The reports from the surface had included a list of improvised weapons that read like a fever dream: fire extinguishers used as projectiles, cooking oil deployed as a slipping hazard. One memorable incident involving an elderly human woman and an extremely aggressive application of something called a garden hose. "What do you want?" Xyph asked, deciding that directness might be his only viable strategy. The humans exchanged glances. The general pulled out a physical document, actual paper, like some kind of barbarian, and slid it across the table. "These are our terms, non-negotiable." Xyph scanned the document, his translator working overtime. "You want technology sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs, a seat on this Galactic Dominion Council." He looked up in disbelief. "You want to join, not join," the strategic advisor corrected. "Partner. Big difference. We're not interested in being anyone's subjects, but we're very interested in all that fancy technology you've been hoarding. Faster than light travel, energy shields, your medical tech that our scientists are extremely excited about. We share resources, you don't conquer us, everyone wins." "That's not how the Dominion works," Xyph protested weakly. "It is now." Ambassador Hayes, "Because here's the alternative. You leave, go back to your council, or whatever, admit you got defeated by a species that hasn't even achieved light speed yet. That'll look great on your record. Or you go back with a new partnership agreement with a species that clearly has potential, given that we kicked your mechanical backsides with 20th century technology and aggressive improvisation." The tactical officer leaned in to whisper, "Commander, she has a point. The council will want to know how we failed. A partnership agreement looks better than a retreat." Xyph wanted to argue, but the logic was infuriatingly sound. The Dominion had never encountered a species quite like humans, aggressive enough to fight back, creative enough to turn anything into a weapon, but apparently reasonable enough to negotiate once they'd proven their point. It was like fighting someone who kept changing the rules mid-game and somehow making it work. "What about your nuclear weapons?" he asked. "You threatened us with those." General Williams shrugged. "We also threaten each other with them constant. Hasn't stopped us from having international trade agreements and tourism. You get used to the existential dread. That's deeply disturbing." "Yeah, we know," So about that technology transfer. The next 3 hours were an exercise in diplomatic chaos that made Xyph long for the simplicity of orbital bombardment. The humans wanted everything: FTL drives, energy weapons, shield technology, medical advances, even the recreational matter synthesizers that Dominion ships used for food preparation. In exchange, they offered access to Earth's resources, cultural products, and what they called human innovation in applied physics. What's human innovation? Xyph asked suspiciously. The strategic advisor grinned. Remember how we weaponized our orbital garbage? That's human innovation. We take whatever we have, figure out its most ridiculous possible application, and then make it work through sheer stubbornness and creative problem solving. Your people think in straight lines, we think in spirals that somehow end up at the right destination. That sounds inefficient. It's extremely inefficient. It's also how we went from horse-drawn carriages to splitting atoms in about a century. The advisor pulled up holographic displays showing human technological progress, and Xyph felt his certainty crumbling further. We're messy, unpredictable, and we have terrible survival instincts. But we're also really good at figuring things out when someone tells us something is impossible. Ambassador Hayes added another document to the pile. We're also offering military cooperation, not as subjects, as allies. You seem to have a large empire, which means you probably have enemies. We're very good at making enemies uncomfortable. You're offering to help us in conflicts? Xyph asked, momentarily distracted from his growing headache. Sure, you point us at a problem, we'll solve it in the most chaotic way possible. Fair warning though, our methods might violate several conventions on acceptable warfare. We have a complicated relationship with rules. The tactical officer looked genuinely interested now. Commander, having humans as irregular forces could be strategically valuable. Their unpredictability would be an asset in asymmetric warfare scenarios. They attacked us with garbage, Xyph reminded her. Exactly. Imagine that creativity applied to our enemy. It was a compelling argument, made more compelling by the fact that Xyph was running out of options. He could reject the terms, return to the Dominion Council, and explain how he'd failed to conquer a primitive world. Or he could spin this entire disaster into a diplomatic victory, return with a new partner species that had proven their worth through unconventional means. When framed that way, there was really only one choice. I'll need to consult with the Dominion Council, he said finally. Take your time, General Williams said, standing up and stretching. We'll be down on Earth, not being conquered. Send us a message when you've made a decision. Oh, and Commander? Yes. Next time you want to invade someone, maybe do some better research first. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. The humans left, taking their briefcases and their unsettling confidence with them. Xyph sat alone in the conference room, staring at the stack of documents that somehow represented the most successful failure of his military career. His tactical officer returned, looking hesitant. Orders, Commander? Draft a communication to the Council, Xyph said tiredly. Tell them we've successfully initiated first contact with a species of significant strategic value. Emphasize their technological adaptability and creative warfare applications. Leave out the parts about the garbage and the air conditioning, and the partnership terms. Xyph looked at the blue planet rotating peacefully below, at the species that had defeated 600 warships with nothing but stubbornness and poor impulse control. Accept them, he decided, and pray to whatever gods are listening that we never have to fight humans when they actually have proper weapons. The Dominion Council received Xyph's report with the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals or catastrophically failed fiscal quarters. He stood in the holographic chamber, projected across 300 light-years, while 24 council members from equally diverse species stared at him with varying expressions of disbelief. Let me understand this correctly, Council Prime, a floating crystalline entity that communicated through light pulses, said slowly. You encountered a pre-FTL species and decided to form a partnership instead of completing standard integration protocol. That is correct, Xyph confirmed, keeping his mandibles carefully neutral. And this decision was made because attempting standard integration would have resulted in unacceptable losses and prolonged conflict with a species that demonstrates remarkable adaptability and unconventional tactical thinking. What he didn't say, because humans were absolutely insane and he'd watched a planet full of them turn everyday objects into weapons with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested they'd been waiting their entire evolutionary history for someone to invade so they could test out their theory. Another council member, this one resembling a floating jellyfish with too many tentacles,
pulsed forward. Commander Xyph, your military record is exemplary. 473 successful integration. But this report suggests you were defeated by a civilization that still uses chemical propulsion and hasn't mastered basic energy manipulation. Not defeated, Xyph corrected carefully. Strategically redirected toward mutually beneficial cooperation. That's just defeat with better vocabulary, a third council member muttered. The council prime dimmed thoughtfully. Tell us about these humans. What makes them so dangerous that the Dominion's finest battle commander recommends partnership over conquest? Xyph had prepared for this question. He pulled up data files, projecting them into the shared holographic space. Humans evolved on a death world. Moderate gravity, but aggressive ecosystem. Their planet regularly attempts to kill them through weather patterns, geological instability and predators. They responded by conquering their entire planet and developing technology at an exponential rate. Many species develop technology, someone interrupted. Not like this. Xyph expanded the timeline. They went from powered flight to splitting atoms in 40 years, from no space capability to landing on their moon in 12 years. They're currently debating colonizing their neighboring planet despite having no life support technology that would make it practical. They just want to do it because it's there. The council went quiet, studying the data. They also, Xyph continued, have no unified government. Multiple nation-states, competing ideologies, different languages. They've fought wars with each other continuously throughout their history. Yet when we arrived, they coordinated a defense response in under 6 hours. They stopped fighting each other and focused entirely on the external threat. Impressive threat response, the jellyfish entity admitted. It gets better, Xyph said, pulling up combat reports. Their military technology is primitive but effective. They compensate for technological gaps with creativity. When they discovered our shields were optimized for energy weapons, they immediately switched to kinetic ammunition. When they realized they couldn't match our numbers, they weaponized their orbital debris. When our cyber warfare systems attempted to infiltrate their networks, their entire planetary information system corrupted our AI through sheer chaos. He displayed images of the memes, the viral videos, the cascading nonsense that had turned his tactical AI into a philosophical debate engine. Several council members recoiled visibly. What kind of civilization weaponizes cultural content? Someone asked, horrified. Humans do, constantly. To each other. Xyph pulled up more data. They have entire industries dedicated to capturing attention, manipulating emotion, and spreading information. They've been engaged in information warfare with themselves for decades. Our systems were not prepared for that level of psychological chaos. The council prime brightened, which Xyph had learned meant it was either very interested or very concerned. So you're suggesting we accept this partnership because they're too chaotic to conquer efficient? I'm suggesting we accept this partnership because attempting to conquer them would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately counterproductive. They have resources we can use, technology development speed we can't match, and more importantly, they're willing to work with us if treated as equals. Equals. The word rippled through the council with obvious skepticism. They defeated our invasion force using garbage and climate control, Xyph said flatly. I think we owe them some respect. The debate lasted 2 hours. Council members argued about precedent, about protocols, about what it meant for the Dominion's reputation if they accepted partnership with a species they'd failed to conquer. Xyph waited, watching Earth rotate below his flagship, wondering what the humans were doing right now, probably arguing among themselves, making memes about the invasion, turning the entire incident into entertainment content. Finally, the council prime pulsed, motioned to accept partnership terms with humanity, pending standard diplomatic protocols and technology exchange agreements. All in favor. The vote was closer than Xyph expected, but it passed. He felt something that might have been relief or might have been the beginnings of an ulcer. Hard to tell. Commander Xyph, the council prime said, you will remain as primary liaison. Try not to let them corrupt any more of our AIs. The council dissolved, leaving Xyph alone with his thoughts and a diplomatic agreement that would probably give the bureaucracy fits for the next decade. He opened a channel to Earth, to General Williams, who was probably drinking coffee and enjoying his uncompleted conquest. General, the Dominion Council has accepted the partnership terms. The general's face appeared on screen, looking unsurprised. Figured they would. You want to come down for the signing ceremony? We're thinking something casual, maybe outdoors. Nothing too formal. Humans defeated a galactic invasion and want a casual ceremony? We also want to discuss those FTL drive specifications and maybe get some of those fancy food synthesize. Figure we can multitask. The general paused. Fair warning. There's going to be a lot of media coverage. Hope you're ready to be famous. Xyph thought about fame, about returning to Dominion space as the commander who'd failed to conquer a primitive world, but somehow turned it into a diplomatic victory, about what the other battle commanders would say, about the fact that his tactical AI was still arguing about ethics on human internet forums. I'll be there, he said, because really, what choice did he have? The ceremony happened on Earth's surface, in a city called Geneva, which humans insisted was appropriate for historical reasons. Xyph stood on a stage surrounded by human media devices, diplomatic representatives from a dozen Earth nations, and what appeared to be several thousand curious civilians who'd shown up just to see aliens in person. Ambassador Hayes presented the signed agreement with appropriate formality, then immediately asked when they could expect the first technology shipment. General Williams posed for photographs, making the humans' peculiar thumbs-up gesture. Someone in the crowd held a sign reading "Welcome Space Friends," next to another sign reading "Thanks for not destroying us." It wasn't how Xyph had imagined first contact going. It wasn't even close to standard protocol. But standing there on Earth's surface, watching humans celebrate a victory they'd achieved through pure chaotic stubbornness, he had to admit a certain grudging respect. The galaxy had conquered hundreds of worlds with overwhelming force and superior technology. Earth had defeated that strategy by simply refusing to follow anyone's rules but their own. Later, much later, when Xyph was writing his final report, he added one last observation that would never make it into the official files but felt important nonetheless. Humanity didn't win through superior technology or military might. They won because they made conquest more trouble than it was worth, and then convinced us the alternative was better for everyone involved. This may be the most dangerous capability we've encountered in any species, the ability to turn defeat into negotiation, and negotiation into victory, simply by refusing to accept that anything is impossible. He closed the report and looked at the partnership agreement sitting on his desk. Somewhere on Earth, humans were probably already reverse engineering Dominion technology and planning their first interstellar voyage. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Xyph poured himself a drink. Humans had introduced him to something called whiskey, which was apparently made from plants and bad decisions, and raised it toward the viewport showing Earth in the distance. To humanity, he said to the empty room, "May the universe forgive us for what we've unleashed." The stars didn't answer, but then again they rarely did. They just kept spinning, indifferent and eternal, while a small blue planet full of impossible creatures prepared to join them. And somewhere in the databanks, Xyph's corrupted AI posted another meme about the invasion, already planning its stand-up comedy tour across Dominion space. The universe would never be the same. Chat control.